So today I wanted to take a little bit of time to just slow down opposed to always being out in the streets. There's not too much to shoot out there. And so, there's a lot of time I'm spending here at home, doing other things, working my other job, and just taking time to really just hone in on what I do, learn from my mistakes, learn from myself, learn from other people, other masters out there. And so today I wanted to talk specifically about the settings I use for my Ricoh GRiii when I'm out shooting on the streets. So to start off, I really like to shoot manually. And a lot of that comes from my experience with shooting with 35mm film cameras, or just film in general. For the most part, the cameras I use are all manual, more specifically my Leica M6. And so every single setting, from the speed I shoot the film at to the shutter speed, the aperture, and whatnot, is all manual. So I know each time I go out and I shoot and I change the settings, and I take mental notes or I write that down, I can come back, look at those results and see what I like most and what works most for me, and then continue to practice that way so that over time I get used to the tool, learn how to use the tool. That way it disappears and I can just hone in and focus on the environment I'm shooting, the subject I'm shooting, just the atmosphere around me when I'm out shooting on the streets, and really just focus. And this is just an extension of me when I'm out there. Now, I'm not saying I'm a master or anything at all, but that's just the way I try to approach street photography, or just photography in general, when I'm shooting. How can I best learn the camera so that I can simply take better photos, or just focus on taking better photos? When it comes to digital, I do find myself struggling a bit, just because of the fact that film works better when it comes to protecting the highlights. So I expose things very specifically with film. I'm okay with overexposing, whereas digital, I can't do that. So with any digital camera I use, I'm always doing my best to protect the highlights. So to kind of go over just the entire camera body, starting from like the exterior into like the interior settings, the viewfinder on top here is actually pretty nice. It's the 28mm GV-2 viewfinder. It's the one that comes with the Street Edition. And to be completely honest, I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of this viewfinder specifically. A part of that is because I wear glasses, and when I hold it up to my eye, I'm not really getting as close as I can to the viewfinder without scratching up my glasses. So it's a little hard to see through. And also, it's not connected to the camera. And so you don't get any data readout through the viewfinder. So when you're exposing, or when you're just taking your shots, rather, you have to look at your screen to just make sure you're not overexposing or underexposing your image. So that's a little bit of a downside to the viewfinder here. I am curious to what like the bigger viewfinders that I can attach on top of this 28mm looks like, and just how that operates, because I think simply if this was wider, I would enjoy it a lot more. So one setting that I use from time to time, but that I actually liked before the update that introduced the touch focus and everything, or touch snapshot, whatever it's called, where you touch the screen and it takes a picture. I used to like to run around with the display off on the camera and just kind of almost set everything to auto except for my aperture, so that I can just kind of run around and shoot and just focus on the environment rather than the camera, and just check to make sure that I'm in a good range. I'm not underexposing or overexposing anything too dramatically. I use it sometimes on here, and again, I just need to go into the settings myself and figure out just how to turn off the touch snap shooting or the touch shooting, so that if my nose is up against the camera when I'm looking through the viewfinder, it doesn't accidentally take a picture. But from time to time, I will turn the display off and just shoot that way, more so that I can focus. One cool thing with the display being off, you can change the camera settings, and the screen will turn on. It won't show you an image, but it will turn on to show you what settings you're choosing. So I really like that. So opposed to a camera like the Fuji X100V, where you can really customize a lot of the buttons on the camera. There are a few buttons on this camera, not as many as the X100V, and only a few select buttons you can customize, such as obviously the function button, a few of the buttons on the back of the D-pad, kind of joystick, whatever, and then as well as the custom movie button, or changing it to movie mode on the side. So I'm gonna go over a few of my settings that I have there, or I guess all of them. So the main function button I have set to change the focal length of the camera from 28mm to 35 to 50. And you can set it to many different things. And again, I don't use a lot of just the advanced features that this camera can do, or just a lot of like metering stuff, because I like to just jump into one of the quicker menus and change those settings. But I use that because depending on the situation I'm in, I like to just be able to see what a frame would look like if I would crop it in a little bit. I usually don't do 50mm on this because I know it's cropping a lot on the sensor. So obviously the highest I'll go is 35. But for the most part, I like to shoot at 28 because I already shoot with a 35mm on my Leica, so it's very cool to just have that difference when you're shooting on a different camera, opposed to carrying around two cameras with the same focal length. So a lot of the back buttons on the camera, for the most part, are customizable, except for one of the buttons, which I'll explain here in a little bit, that actually annoys me a little bit. But you can program the ISO. I leave the ISO at ISO, so I can change it to auto or just manually change it to what I want. White balance I leave the same. The drive setting, where you have your different shooting rates or self-timer, I change that to snap focus distance so that I can quickly just set my snap focus distance, and I usually try and stay between 5 meters and infinity. And then the macro button. The macro button's interesting because there's a certain way, if you're using snap focus, you hold down the macro button and you spin the wheel in front of the shutter button to change your snap focus distance. But I really wish I could just disable the macro button altogether so that I can not accidentally put the camera into macro mode, because I never use this camera in macro mode. The custom function on the side of the camera with the movie mode, I have that set to, if you press and hold it, and I believe it's the default, it will enable the Wi-Fi transmitting so that you can transfer your photos to your phone, whether I want to edit in Lightroom or VSCO or just transfer the photo to my phone and do whatever with it, then I can do that. So now let's talk about just a few of my settings internally in the camera that I use when shooting. So on the top of the camera here, you have 3 different user functions labeled U1, U2, and U3. And I have all 3 of those set to different settings depending on the environment I'm in. So the first 2, U1 is set to just a standard black and white setting, where it's fully manual, so I have full control over everything I'm shooting. On U2, it's about the same, but I have my focus set to snap focus, and my aperture and everything set at f8, and my ISO at auto, so that, you know, if I want to really make the camera just a point and shoot camera, or just want to use the snap focus features, I can do that. And then last but not least, the user 3 mode I have set to color mode, where I'm shooting in what is it called? Positive film. And this one I don't use too much because, again, I just see in black and white. I shoot everything in RAW, so I have that flexibility, you know, when I go to edit the photo, to leave it in color or change it to black and white. But it's my main color mode, all manual settings. A lot of the times as well, I will use the camera in manual mode though, for the most part. And that's because it's kind of just a default mode where I don't have any of these preset functions set, so that if I don't use the camera for a long period of time, I'm not stuck using a mode where I don't know exactly what all settings or just automatic things are going on in the camera. I don't have that set and just kind of forget about what's going on in the camera. So I really like to shoot in manual mode a lot and just keep that full control. And for the most part, when I'm shooting on the streets, my shutter speed is always set to 250, and then I'm bouncing between f8 and 16 or 22 if possible. And then I'll shoot manual ISO a lot, but sometimes I like to just put it in auto ISO and set the metering mode to highlight weighted so that I can protect the highlights as much as possible. And I'll only use highlight weighted if I'm in a section of a street where, you know, buildings are kind of covering the sun and we're in a lot of shadow. But if there is a certain section where there's a lot of sunlight hitting, I won't use center weighted. I'll just use the multi-segment setting so that the camera doesn't just expose for the highlights and leave the shadows really dark. So that's about it for today. That is how I use the Ricoh GRiii for street photography. Again, I think this is an amazing camera for just what it does, for how compact it is. I really enjoy it. I think it is one of the best cameras that you can kind of pick up at this time, whether that's the GR2, the GR3. I think I do kind of prefer the GR2 in terms of functionality because of the lack of the touch screen for taking pictures. I might be wrong on that. I'm not 100% sure, so don't take my word for that. But I feel like one issue that I do have with the GR3 is that whether I'm changing the exposure compensation, I will accidentally nudge it down, you know, sometimes a stop, sometimes like a third of a stop, or nudge it up a little too much. So that annoys me a little bit. The wheel on the back here is a bit sensitive. I wish I did have just that kind of up and down toggle dial that is on the GR2, because I find that a lot easier to avoid when it comes to accidentally changing that specific setting. Regardless, I think they're both great cameras and you can't really go wrong either way you choose. So thank you guys for watching this video. I'd appreciate it if you'd give it a thumbs up, and please consider subscribing because I definitely have more content coming. And please leave a comment below just telling me what camera you guys like to use for your street photography setup, what type of stuff you guys like to shoot out on the street, because I definitely enjoy reading your guys' comments and responding to them. Until next time, catch you guys later.